I'm just going to quickly introduce myself. Hello, everyone. My name is Ashlyn Preswicki. I am the founder of Threaded and the Midwest coordinator for Fashion Revolution USA. I'm really grateful to have put together an event for you today with many amazing speakers and individuals who are experts in the sustainable and ethical fashion space. And many of them are located right here in the Midwest. And one of those is an amazing woman that I met named Emily, who is going to be leading us on this call today. And I'm just going to hand it right over to her to get it started and kick us off.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And I just want to say thank you so much to Ashlyn and Threaded, as well as Fashion Revolution Week for allowing us to partner on this. It's so exciting to have Remake involved. And I'm just so impressed with how you have pivoted this whole event to online and made this education accessible to everyone from so far away. So I think it's amazing, and thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm Emily Stokel. I'm located in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I'm excited to be the moderator for today's Wear Your Values workshop. I'm a writer, and I share content about sustainability and fashion on my platform, which is called Broom and Daisy. And I'm also the producer and host of Pre-Love Podcast, which is an interview show about vintage and secondhand style. And I've always been a writer. My first love is storytelling, and I want to use my platform to share the power of good stories and inspire people to consume more consciously, to embrace slow fashion, and to live in a lifestyle that's in line with their values. And that's how I got connected with Remake. Remake is an excellent nonprofit organization. It's for women by women movement, focused on making the fashion industry more transparent. And it's this excellent global community of educators and influencers and designers who've all pledged to remake our closet with fashion that respects people and planet. And as a movement, we try to bring people together to see how fashion and women's rights issues and climate justice are all connected. And we tell stories in a human-centered way. And that's what really connected me to Remake's mission. I became a Remake ambassador last year during Fashion Revolution Week. So it's just about my 1 year volunteering with Remake, when I had the opportunity to have today's featured guest, Aisha, on Pre-Loved Podcast. And I'm just really excited that this has come full circle and we're able to partner today on this event. So I'm going to introduce Aisha and kick it over to her. She is a wealth of knowledge. She is the founder of Remake, which has been labeled the Peace Corps of fashion. It's a nonprofit organization that believes fashion can be a force for good. And I hope you'll walk away from today's conversation thinking that it's time for this force for good revolution. Today, we're going to talk about using our purchasing power and our voice to make the invisible women who power the fashion industry visible. And we'll show you how you can get involved. So let's get started. Please join me in welcoming Aisha.
Hi, everyone. I wish we were able to do this in person. It's so wonderful to see so many people from around the world. I so appreciate Emily and Ashlyn for putting this together. And so what I wanted to do was keep today highly interactive. I want us to really have a conversation. As thoughts pop up, please put it in the Q&A. As Emily mentioned, I'm Aisha. I'm the founder and CEO of Remake. And for us, when we think about how do we change our behavior, how do we think about the people that make our clothes, it all starts with storytelling. And so what I wanted to do was start with 3 short stories today as a way for us to really frame the conversation. And so the first is really, the story of our clothes. I think about myself and when I fell in love with fashion, I have this distinct memory of being a little girl and looking up at my grandmother who raised me, who was this beautiful woman from Pakistan. She had a pashmina shawl on, her jewelry was glinting, and I was just in love. I think for so many of us, fashion is this extension of our identity, and it makes us feel good, especially in these times of shelter and place. But, unfortunately, when we think about fashion, and particularly over the last 15 years, our clothes are coming to us too soon, too fast, and be made with too little money, and we're throwing it away too fast. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation said that it's something like 100 billion units of clothes that we're making per year, and we're throwing that away within the first year of production. I think it's important to contextualize that there's only 8 billion people on the planet. And so for us as people who think about women's empowerment and the climate crisis, it's to say, well, all of this plunder of natural resources, what's really the impact? And often, I think one of the things that the industry has done wrong is essentially separate the conversation of our planetary boundaries and the environment with human rights. Often fashion starts at the commodity level, so cotton. And as many of you know, cotton is both a pesticide-heavy crop. It takes a lot of fertilizer. There's a lot of awful chemicals that go into picking conventional cotton. But also, there is a lot of child labor when it comes to cotton. We've made a lot of inroads when it comes to Uzbekistan, where some of the littlest citizens have been picking our cotton. But then we've heard stories in the Uyghur region of China essentially having concentration camps where cotton is coming from. Obviously, when we think about a lot of us wearing our work from home outfits now, sweatpants and jeans, a lot of that is very thirsty crop. It takes as much drinking water that you and I would drink for 2 years to make just one t-shirt. And as someone who's in the drought-ridden region of California, you understand how precious water is as a resource. And so we at Remake don't really think of the planetary conversation and the human rights conversation as different, because often they go hand in hand. It's the same communities that are going to deal with drought and the contamination of their soils are the ones that are also working in really egregious working conditions. So there's, obviously the environmental side of this. They say there's up to 8,000 synthetics in our clothes today. A lot of us, maybe if you think about your relationship with food and how we think of organic food, and we don't want things that have pesticides that we're putting in our body, yet very often we don't have the human health conversation of what we're putting on our body. Our skin is our biggest organ, and when we put on clothes with all of these synthetics, it's to say, well, how much of this is getting absorbed in our skin? What's the impact from an endocrine disruptor? What about, cancer rates? And as someone who spent a lot of time in dye houses and mills and factories, let me tell you, when you walk into a factory, that raw throat smell that lingers on even after a few minutes, and you look around at the people and they're not wearing protective gear, they're inhaling these fumes, and you recognize how much fashion is also a healthcare crisis. And I think we often don't talk about fashion in those terms. But one of the things that is near and dear, I know, to both the Remake's heart as well as Fashion Revolutions is that fashion is also the way it's made today a women's empowerment issue. This is one of the few industries that's mostly made by women, whether we think about the designers who are creating our fashion, the people on the cut-sew line who are stitching our clothes, or the models who are marketing us fashion. And yet, when we look at the billionaires who own the fashion industry, it's mostly a few men who built their profits on the backs of women. I think one of the things for people to understand here is how much sexual violence and harassment is embedded within the fashion industry. As someone who spent a lot of time within factories, it's very common. You see the shot of workers being forced to work sooner, faster, harder, and often it's a man walking up and down. He is the supervisor of the factory, and essentially what he's telling them is to hurry up. And, there's this sense, particularly in the global South, that women are more docile. They won't push back on wages. They're often propositioned. And so as we think about why we should care about these issues, it's everything, whether you're calling in from London or right here in the Midwest, all the things that we care about, right? The climate crisis is here. We know that water and our natural resources are scarce. And we know that, women should be making equal pay for equal work. And all of these issues are embedded all the way through the fashion supply chain. Of course, this being April, we cannot forget that it is also the 7-year anniversary of Rana Plaza. This is what had sparked the fashion revolution movement. I was actually part of the Better Work team. We were a partnership within the International Labor Organization, the team that led the compensation fund for the victims of Rana Plaza. And I think what's really important as we're walking into April is to not forget the 1,100, mostly mothers, sisters, wives, daughters, who lost their lives that day. And, as someone who's been working very closely as coronavirus has spread across our world and has really impacted the makers in Pakistan and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, many of the countries that were so impacted by industrial disasters, we're seeing the fashion industry turn their backs on these same makers. And one wonders, how much have we learned when it comes to Rana Plaza? How can we make sure that all those lives lost were not lost in vain? And we started all the way at the commodity level. I took you on a very speedy, both sort of heartfelt, hopefully, but also data-driven journey on our clothes. I think one of the things where we end is, well, where do clothes end up? And I know this is a conversation near and dear to Emily's heart. And I think even when, before the pandemic, when we were thinking we're doing the right thing, we pack up our clothes and take them to Goodwill or charity shop or Salvation Army. One of the things that people don't realize is because fast fashion is made with such poor quality, it's essentially not built to last. If there's tears or stains in your clothes, a lot of these shops don't have the capability to repair them. And so even of what we donate globally, only 10% is resold. In talking to community organizers and secondhand shops in Ghana and North Africa and other places where our clothes end up, what we hear is we've essentially made those countries dumping grounds for our clothes. They don't have a resale value. They're having to deal with their landfills, just essentially filling up with loads and loads of clothes. And, because if you go into your closet today and you take a look, so little of what's made is a virgin material, is 100% cotton. There's polyester blend in it, and polyester is essentially plastic, right? And so what that means is anything that is blended material won't break down. It can take anywhere from 50 to 200 years, depending on what's in our clothes, for it to break down. So where's all these clothes going? And I've been having some conversations with Goodwill and others right now in the pandemic. And as people are home, there's been a lot of, cleaning your closet, Marie Kondoing it. And they've essentially been just dumping and leaving clothes on the sidewalks. But because of the pandemic, because we don't know if and how long the virus can live on our clothes, a lot of these charity shops are closed. And so it's just dumping behavior. So if we think about, the life cycle of our clothes and all of the impacts, in many ways it's a horror movie, right? It's a horribly depressing story. But we at Remake are really a brand of hope and inspiration. I took you on a speedy journey to set up the facts, but what I really want to talk to you about for the bulk of the time is about the solutions. As Emily mentioned, we're a for women, by women movement. We have some wonderful men who are, also on the front lines of joining us. And we've committed as designers and creatives and people in this industry who are activists, but also everyday shoppers who just love fashion, to say, well, what can we do? How can we make it a part of being a force for good? Because it is one of the largest employers of women. It is an industry that has the power to do so much. And so our slogan, see, I have the t-shirt on, Wear Your Values, is really about how can we use and unlock the power of our advocacy voice, but also our shopping dollars to make a difference. And so I wanted to pivot now from this terrible story that has been fashion, over the last 15, 20 years, to a more hopeful story. And that's the story of the maker. I think language is very important, and we at Remake don't talk about workers in the fashion supply chain because the term worker has been dehumanized. It's often pushing people as a cost center to work like machines, sooner, faster, harder, regardless of the health implications to her body. And so we prefer to call her the maker, because she is someone who's made art for us, right? Built something with beauty and creativity, that there's a lot of love that goes into our clothes. And so we really start the conversation there. You know, who are the people who make our clothes, which I know is such an important slogan for Fashion Revolution. We take it a step further, and over the last many years, we've gone undercover. We've gone into dye houses and mills and cut and sew factories and artisan communities, really to get to meet her. And you know, if you're Netflix and chilling at home, you have a little bit more time, check out our platform, remake.world. We have a docu-series there that's free to watch. We've been to Cambodia and Mexico, India, China, Pakistan. All the docu-series is short, but really, one of the things I want you to take away is to realize that she is a badass. She is a source of hope and inspiration, just like we are. You know, often the women who make our clothes are the first in their families to leave their villages and go into the big bad city world. She is supporting upwards of 5 family members on her salary. She is there fighting on the front lines for justice and visibility. I've always been amazed when we go into these communities, thrust a mic and ask questions, how camera ready she is. And you know, one of the things the makers of our clothes have often told us is, well, for the longest time, no one asked. No one wanted to know our stories. And so, you know, it's not just, I think, about the pain-centered narrative of the statistics, you know. So many of them talk about being designers in their own right, loving fashion, thinking about the people that wear the clothes that they work 10, 11 hours to make. And so, to Emily's point, so much of this goes back to that story, right? Because if we think of her as a full-centered human being, then perhaps rather than fleeting sympathy, we'll have empathy. And we'll connect and realize that this fight for a just and sustainable fashion industry is us as sisters across the supply chain advocating for one another. And so, you know, we played with a lot of different technology because we wanted to give you a little bit of a preview of our docuseries. One of the things we've realized is, you know, with everyone on Zoom calls now, it takes a long time for video to play. And so rather than playing a full video, we can send Ashlyn links if you're interested in some of the docuseries later. I wanted to play for you all a trailer of our latest docuseries. We had screenings set up around the country, but unfortunately with COVID-19, what we're doing now is instead a lot of these virtual conversations. Why LA? I think it's because often there is a disconnect and misunderstanding that somehow all of these issues that we've talked about, the impacts on women, that it happens somewhere far away. And because the US has the right labor protections, that somehow it would never happen here. You know, sometimes our community thinks that, oh, you know, if I buy made in USA or I buy made in the UK, then somehow it's all good. And so we went undercover in LA really to give you a sense of, you know, anything that can happen in Bangladesh or Cambodia is also happening right here in our backyard. So I'll go ahead and play, and then you know, I want to leave you with a few tips on how we can all be a part of the solution, but really then I want to hear your questions. So as questions are popping up, please do put them in the Q&A. So here we go.
I remember when I first started doing this, we were going into several factories a day in LA. And I watched my colleague walk down the aisle of sewing machines and touch the empty machines to see if they were warm, so she would know if people had left when we walked in. That really opened my eyes to the idea that whatever you see, there could be so much more.
My name is Jenny, originally from Indonesia. The first time I was at a garment factory. The factory, they don't have lamp, they don't have tissue in the bathroom, nothing.
Made in US, made in LA, there's a very dangerous assumption that it's made ethically, it's made legally. It's hard for people to conceive that literally right down the street, people are working in sweatshop conditions. But we really need to highlight that problem, and we need to clean this up.
If they say it can't be done responsibly, that's a lie. It is all possible. That's how we've grown to this point.
Government worker is high-skilled workers. Not everyone can do it. For me, it's like beauty, like art. I want to make spectacular fashion for Lady Gaga. I think she won't wear it.
I was a victim. I'm survivor.
So I hope, you walk away with that realizing that, a lot of the people who are voiceless and vulnerable, whether in the US, the UK, or all over the world, especially now as we think of this pandemic, need us more than ever. And, people like Yenny are on the front lines, telling their story and speaking their truth. And so if any of you are interested, the full documentary, we are making it available for you to have screening parties and to learn more. But I wanted to end really with the story of all of us, us as a collective of people who woken up this morning, to have this conversation, who are eager to be change makers in our communities to say, well, what can we all do? And I think the first is really to know that, especially with the pandemic and thinking about, the fashion industry may currently be in a free fall, that our voices and advocacy still matters. And it's not about some slogan, feminist t-shirt and just saying I'm woke, put it on Instagram and peace out. But it's really about, the little steps adding into what can make truly a difference. And so, we at Remake, one of the first things that we do when we talk to our community, it's a community of 150,000 people. There's over 300 ambassadors like Emily, who's amazing. And it's to say, well, what's the first step, right? And we often talk about the first step is simply breaking up with fast fashion, to know that it has plundered our waterways, to know that it has caused a disproportionate impact on the exploitation of women's bodies, to know that so many of our natural resources are used and abused for what? A $5 t-shirt that we'll wear 5 times and throw it away. And so we often like to think of fast fashion as the bad boyfriend that we just have to break up with, And then next it's thinking about, relationships. And I love to think of this as, breaking up with Tinder and going for quality over quantity. So it's thinking about how do we buy better? And I know currently, a lot of our incomes are shrinking. We perhaps are not in buying mode, which is absolutely important. But if you're thinking about what's the cozy pair of pants that maybe I'm going to wear while I'm doing all these Zoom calls, it's to say, well, every shopping dollar that goes towards a sustainable brand ensures that the workers at the other end are treated better, ensures that we're thinking about the environmental impacts. And so on our platform, Remake.world, we give our seal of approval to truly sustainable brands. We have a directory. Our members are all constantly voting to tell us which are the brands to vet. The thing to know is, as a nonprofit, no money exchanges hands. Unlike, influencers and such, there's no affiliate marketing. There's no connections that we have with these brands. So we're essentially just like Greenpeace, right? Saying these are the brands that are doing better if you are to spend, and these are the brands that are not. And so it's really about remaking our closet, as Emily had said, with those fewer, better things. But then you might say, hey, Aisha, I'm not in a time right now with my stimulus check to be spending a lot of money. What else can I do? And this is where we talk about, well, your voice really matters. How you show up today, how you advocate, it really does matter. And so within the COVID-19 crisis, one of the things that we've been very focused on over the last couple of weeks is our Pay Up campaign. And the thing to understand here is that very often the suppliers and in the end the workers of our clothes bear the most amount of risk. It's common in the fashion industry that when fashion products are made, that it is only once the products is on the ships coming to the UK or the US or whatever part of the Western world, that it can be 15, 30 or up to 90 days that the factories are then paid for the products that have already been made. So we started, as COVID-19 started to spread in mid-March, to ask, well, what's been happening? What's been happening to the frontline garment maker communities? And one of the things that we heard that was really disturbing was, as stores in the Western world started to shutter, as online sales started to plummet, factories were not getting paid. And so even for orders that had been made in February and March, and so for where you had, the material cost had already been spent, you had the labor that had already been done, brands were simply not paying up for these orders. And we're talking about millions of workers who are already living paycheck to paycheck, who are completely insecure. From a food standpoint, from a transportation standpoint, many of the women were trying to get back to their villages in Cambodia, we heard, and they're unable to because they don't have money in the pocket. In Sri Lanka, we've heard that women are in their dorms in the city of Colombo, again, trying to figure out how to get home. In Bangladesh, we saw aerial drone footage of workers literally walking en masse to try and see if factories were open without any protective gear. It's such a crowded city in Dhaka and Chittagong that they're not able to social distance, just saying we need to be paid. So outside of some of the urgent relief efforts that we're trying to cobble together, what I want you all to know is that your voice matters. We launched our Pay Up campaign, and within a week, we had over 5,500 signatures. One of the things that's clever with this petition is that every time you sign the petition, the CEO, the executives of these fashion brands get a note from us. And I'm happy to share with you that the pressure is working. As of yesterday, 8 brands from H&M to Zara to Tesco have committed to pay up. But our work as activists is never done. And so, outside of just the brands that are paying up and we're trying to figure out how quickly, Walmart today has not agreed to pay up. And, Emily, you being from Minneapolis, it's like Target did, Walmart didn't. So it's like, well, you have to pay for your back bills. So, join our Pay Up campaign. If you love Instagram, we've been holding up signs, asking brands, there in the middle, you'll see Arizona Muse. We've been working with Amber Valletta and Cameron Russell and other models who are using their platform for good. So here's a time where advocacy really is going to make a difference. And so I wanted to end here with, as you saw some of the difficult situations that have always been in LA. We've of course also contacted and had a wonderful webinar with our friends over at the Garment Workers Center to understand, well, what's happening in downtown LA, which is home to 50,000 garment makers. And I think one of the things for people on this call to understand is that a lot of the makers in LA are undocumented. And so a lot of the relief is something that they don't have access to. We've heard directly from makers sewing for Fashion Nova, for example, to say that we haven't been paid for last month, that even for some of the factories that are open with spare capacity, that we don't have the protective gear while we're making masks for other people, which is how ironic is that. And so, one of our hopes is that part of this conversation is a fundraiser, whether it's $1, $5, whatever we can do. Know that the Garment Workers Center is literally going door to door to provide groceries for their member partners. These are women who have stitched clothes for some of the fast fashion brands who today are being forgotten. And so, I hope you walk away with these 3 stories thinking, wow, I know the people who make our clothes in a more textured way. I am armed with facts and an understanding of the impact of our clothes. But I also feel powerful. I also feel powerful in my changemaker journey on how I can use my wallet as well as my voice to do more good. And so I wanted to stop there. It was a speedy workshop because mostly I love conversation, the back and forth, and we learned so much. If you're interested in our movement work, give us a follow. Our Instagram handle is Remake Our World. If you like films and are wanting to sign the petition, it's on the front page of our platform, remake.world. But I know, Emily, you're going to moderate, questions coming in. So let's have a chat. And thank you all so very much for giving me a bit of your morning.
The questions that are coming in are great, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm just going to jump right into it. The first question I have is, I'd love to talk a little bit about the impact of individual action. So do petitions, do boycotts, do consumer demands work? Do they make an impact?
Mm-hmm. It's an excellent question, and I'll let you know this, Emily, that they absolutely do. Today, especially as, brick and mortar was already on its way out with COVID-19, we're going to see a lot of stores that shutter that'll never come back. And so as we have more fashion move online, brands are really reputation sensitive. And so, tagging your favorite brand and asking them, have you paid up? Asking questions. We have heard back from, senior executives of all of these brands because we simply attached all the signatures of people from the change.org petition and said, what's up? And so people should know that, yes, absolutely, especially in this democratized way that we can now access leadership and celebrities, that the petitioning really does work.
So we talked a little bit about the Garment Workers Center focused on garment workers in LA and America, but how can American consumers contribute to organizations that are helping Bangladeshi garment workers during the COVID crisis, which are reputable? Is there a secure way for foreigners to contribute to these causes?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And one of the things that is really difficult in some of these countries is that it's hard to get money wired. And so on our platform, Remake.world, we have 2 ways to make a difference in the COVID crisis now. Within that, every week we are updating with different organizations in Cambodia. In the context of Bangladesh, the Awaj Foundation and BCWS are wonderful foundations. We also have some colleagues who've set up GoFundMe accounts, but part of what we're trying to verify is the money going to get in the hands of the right places? And so what I tell people is come to our platform knowing that we are verifying that the money is getting to the frontline workers that are organizing, that are providing food, because sometimes it can be a little suspect. I think everyone is suddenly raising money, but we need to make sure that the money is going in the right hands and that it is being used for what are the most urgent needs.
And like you mentioned, Remake is that third-party figure, so you can do that vetting objectively. This is kind of a related question. If we can't fully trust made-in labels, are there specific certifications or criteria that we can trust and look for? Some companies have codes of conduct or sustainability reports on their website. How do we know what's a reliable source?
Mm-hmm. And I so appreciate this question because I have so much empathy for everyday people that are trying to do right. Because, as sustainability has become trendy, there is so much greenwashing out there, right? And because there isn't a lot of regulation, unlike a nutrition label on food where you can just take a look and know that this is sustainable, when it comes to sustainability labeling, it's like, well, is organic good? Is Tencel good? Is the fair trade label? There's so much. And sometimes it's a lot of noise. I think especially with corporate responsibility reports and codes of conduct, one of the things to know is that none of that is enforceable or accountable. And so we at Remake really believe that sunshine is the best disinfectant and that transparency is the way to go. And so as a third-party watchdog organization, we give our seal of approval to truly sustainable brands. If you go and you click on Remake.world to our tab of the directory of sustainable brands, and we're constantly adding more, know that these are the most transparent, the ones that are truly committed to the well-being of the communities that make their clothes and that are thinking of environmental sustainability. I wouldn't take what brands tell you at face value.
Mm-hmm. Are there ways that people can submit brands to Remake that they'd like to see vetted, or how does that determination process work?
Yeah, so our ambassadors do this with us, every month. But if you're interested, definitely drop a line to info@remake.world. We have a wonderful research team that does that. We're always interested in, good, bad, and ugly, essentially putting them through our vetting criteria. We also make the scoring open source. So then you're able to go back to your favorite brands and say, hey, I would love to purchase from you, but these are the issues that I'd like to see resolved. And for some brands, we've actually seen that dialogue enable them to have better policies and better reporting that they put out in the public domain.
This is a little bit of a fun one.
Great.
Someone wanted to know how we got into pre-loved or sustainable fashion, if we want to go down the line, maybe.
Yeah, and I would love to hear from you, Emily. Your podcast is such an amazing resource for me. But, I think about pre-loved as the best and most sustainable thing that we can do. Given just the impact, and people ask me, what's the most sustainable brand? I'm like, actually, it's whatever you already have in your closet, and my sister is an artist. She's a lot more fashionable. So I actually like to shop in her closet. So to me, that's another way of being sustainable and having an edge.
Yeah, I got into thrifting as a high school, college student, mostly as a way that I could be expressive without spending a lot of money. And then it was later on, probably closer to 2013 to 2015, that I really became to understand that thrifting was what aligned with my values best. I started to be able to put that sustainability and that ethical part of it together with thrifting, and I've never looked back. And something that I just love about interviewing people on Pre-Love Podcast is that each time someone tells me about a piece that they thrifted that's one of a kind, you can just hear them light up talking about how much it excites them and how much they cherish it. And I just think that there's something really powerful and beautiful in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I have to agree. The power that our clothing has, the memories associated with it. I think there's just a lot. There's just a lot of community and expression that's built into that. I used to upcycle thrifted clothes when I was younger. My grandma bought me my first sewing machine at age 8. So it was just a thing we did together. And I loved it. It was my form of creativity. I even went into costume design when I was in my undergrad. And that's actually when I started to notice the waste. Like we were just throwing away like the cutaways from all of our creations. And I was like, this can't be right. Like this is not an option that we should be considering for these beautiful raw materials. And so that's actually how I started to go down my research around textile waste reduction efforts and different ways that we can really think about using our materials wisely. And then I started to see the human factors, and everything sort of came full circle. And it made sense that fashion could be something that we both loved and saw as an expression and have that beautiful connection to. And it can be a story of good and empowerment and something that's different than what's happening currently in the industry.
I love that. There are lots of great secondhand questions coming in, so maybe we can take a minute to answer some of those. I think going back to the comment that Aisha made about how such a low percentage of our clothes are actually resold inspired this question. But could cutting the unsold pieces to rags or making them into other pieces of clothing help with the unsold pieces at the charity shop problem?
So, my sense is, and Emily, you probably in some of your conversations with Wayne as well, that a lot of the charity shops don't have, that's not their forte, right? They're not in the business of making. And so one of the reasons I love Goodwill, at least to donate clothes when I must, is that they are creating fair employment for the people that are sorting, and they have a business to run from a retail standpoint. So, I haven't really come across a lot of ventures. There is the Renew workshop, I think, up in Seattle that is thinking about mending in a larger way. There haven't been that many interventions from an industrial grade standpoint of how we can mend and put things back in the market. I do know like Eileen Fisher's line Renew does that, but it's early days in some ways to make sure that clothes have that second life.
Yeah, I think something that people forget is some of the big charity shop organizations that we know, like the Goodwill, have been around for decades, and their mission is not clothing recycling. That's the engine that drives their profit. So that's the way that they earn money to do other wonderful charitable things in society. But if it doesn't financially make sense to handle the recycling of the clothing, then it's a bad business decision for them, if that makes sense. So someone has asked, where should we donate our clothes to ensure they'll be recycled if unwanted and not thrown away? A great resource for learning how to properly dispose of your clothes is this book, Conscious Closet by Elizabeth.
Love Elizabeth Klein.
Source. And she walks you through basically like any, because there are going to be those pieces that probably will need to be recycled, that they can't be resold. And there are some charity shops that do it. Off the top of my head, Savers and Oxfam both have programs for this. Some cities have local textile recycling options. But what I would encourage you, someone in the comments, oh, hey, Laura has just commented that Goodwill Arizona has a recycling center. That's what I would encourage, is to contact the place that you're considering taking your donations to, because they may have a system worked out. And if that's something that you want to verify before, the best way to do it is to just contact them directly.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things for people to realize is that we're not going to be able to recycle our way out of this mess. So absolutely, for pieces that you're not wearing, and knowing that there's a difference between, donating, recycling, and dumping, right? So I think sometimes people feel like, oh, I can just, all my worn, torn clothes, send it off, and then it gives me a license to buy. That so much of this starts from our own purchasing habits. And so we often talk about, if you are wanting to buy something, will you wear it at least 30 times? Doesn't seem like a lot, but the average consumer wears things for less than that. And so really investing in those quality pieces that you can wear over and over again, so that you aren't contributing to the waste. So in some ways, the conversation almost starts earlier in terms of, what are we buying? Must we buy it? Can we buy it secondhand? Will we wear it for a long time? Can we take care of our clothes so that they don't fall apart?
Yeah. And, whenever I answer this question on Pre-Love Podcast, people will say, well, are you saying I shouldn't donate my clothes to charity? And that's not necessarily what I'm saying. It's just to be very selective about it and to be very thoughtful about it, to actually make it a donation and not dumping, like you said. Another question that we got is, it's kind of about Remake's brand standards. So how do we measure transparency? Sometimes it can be hard to know if you can trust what the company is reporting. So how does Remake do that vetting?
Yeah. So for anyone that wants to get really technical, we have our full criteria that we built with different experts in the field that we make available to you. But we sincerely believe that it's about what the companies put out in the public domain. And we're not just looking at policies, right? But we're looking at actual goals and metrics and how they're going to get there. To me, policies doesn't tell us anything. And too often codes of conduct, that's all they do. We also have companies that tell us we have all these amazing things, but we don't put it out in the public domain. And so from our perspective, if you don't share it publicly, you immediately get a 0 from our transparency scoring system, because so much of the auditing has been by private companies and private actors, or for the brands themselves, essentially trying to hold them accountable. And we just haven't seen enough movement, enough protections for the environment and people through that. So our stance on transparency is very firm, that you have to share it publicly, so that not just us, but other activists can also be looking at that data and processing it. And that if you set goals, that you have to be reporting periodically against them. And sometimes you'll see in corporate responsibility reports, when companies don't meet their goals, they just change it. They just change the goalposts. It's like, no. You can't say that I'm going to, decarbonize my supply chain by X%, and then next year change that because you didn't make any progress.
All right, this is going to be our last question, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ashlyn to close us out. But people are kind of wondering, okay, what comes next after shifting our individual consumer choices? If we're already on that train, what can we do collectively? And then kind of a combo question with this is, are there people who are working to secure legislation that would make the fashion industry more fair? So is there something like a super PAC system or somewhere where we can get involved on that more policy level rather than individual level?
Mm-hmm. It's an excellent question. And I think, what we should all know is obviously policy is the silver bullet, and that is going to make so much of a difference. And so I'd say for those of you who are already embracing a sustainable fashion lifestyle, on one hand, work is never done, because then it's to say, can you recruit more friends and family and community? Our ambassadors, for example, have a goal of 5 people per year that you can bring into this conversation, because that's how we're going to get to 1 million women that are remaking their closets. So that's the first, is that if you are already exuding that sustainable fashion lifestyle, who else can you bring along? Because so much of this is influencing our culture. And I think, the individual advocacy is a building block towards getting to regulation. In the US, especially at the federal level, we have had many years of actually moving in the opposite direction when it comes to labor and environmental protections. It was only under the Clinton era, when we had Robert Reich as labor secretary, that they had even pushed for our made-in labels in our closets to tell us what country of origin, which at least gives us some traceability. So for those who are really interested from a policy standpoint, I'd say, November's around the corner, vote, register to vote, because that's going to be really important. I think we should also not forget the individual city, county, state level legislation that is also important. Here in California, there's been more of a push around transparency when it comes to the supply chain. I think about the plastic bag ban and how that went, really at a city level. And I do think that if we would start to penalize people for dumping their clothes into the trash, that would also have behavior change. So to me, the whole conversation around textile waste, and it's so expensive for so many cities and the way that we dispose of our clothes, that's an area certainly ripe for legislation.
Wonderful. Well, I wanted to kind of wrap up a little bit and maybe kind of pull in one more question. But I wanted to go back and mention on the Garment Worker Center slide that Aisha was sharing a little bit about, that is supporting, thank you, supporting garment workers in LA. Our event has a opportunity and an option in the Eventbrite link to donate to this relief fund, which is sort of the interim in between while many of these workers are waiting for those pay up from the brands. And so far we've raised $750 to contribute to the Garment Workers Center Fund in LA, and we're really hoping to get even higher and help them reach their goals throughout the course of this event. So if you're feeling compelled and that feels like a good option, you can make a donation in our Eventbrite link. And I do also want to just kind of circle back on a couple questions, and maybe we can kind of get them all in one, but that idea of like collective action. And are there any things, Aisha, that you've seen that you'd like to kind of give us that final call to action, or an impression of what collective action can we do as a community to really push this forward faster?
I would say the Garment Workers Center, just to your note on, for those who are able to give and to donate, just know, they're taking no fees, no money. Anything that goes to the relief fund means directly getting groceries in the hands of people, making sure that they have the most urgent care. So that's wholly important if we're wanting to think about the most vulnerable communities right here in our backyard. From what can you do right now? I would absolutely say, sign and help us keep the pressure up for our Pay Up campaign. We through Instagram have reached over 4.7 million people. The petition, I was looking at signatures, it's over, I think, 5,700 people at this point. Gap is still a holdout in not paying. Walmart is a holdout. And this is directly, as payments come, we know it's the fastest and most urgent way of factories to make sure that they are paying workers. Some of them are waiting since February and March. Payday came and went in April. And so however you can use your influence to get the brands to pay up is the most urgent thing we can currently do during COVID-19.
All right, well, thank you. I see quite a few other amazing questions, and maybe Emily and I can kind of pull those together as we create a recap for this amazing event. We'll get a recording together and try to send out some of these links and do a follow-up email so everyone can get more plugged into Remake. I know one of the questions was about becoming a Remake ambassador.
Yes, become a Remake ambassador. It's very easy. The application form takes not even 5 minutes. We make all of our educational resources, our films open source. It's also a way to really find your tribe. As Emily will know, we have growing chapters up and down the US, some in Europe, particularly in the UK. And I think we really are stronger together. So much of this is finding that community, advocating for change together, and also finding joy in it. So if you have any questions on, the petition or joining the ambassador program, hit me up, info@remake.world. But I'll certainly take time to respond to any of the questions that, we weren't able to get to. And just thank you so much, Emily and Ashlyn. It's these conversations that keep us all going. It's the brightest part of my day. I hope you all know, as dark as these times feel, that this is also time for a reset. And it's an opportunity for us to rebuild the fashion industry into what we want, to be investing in the communities and the value systems for the world that we want to see when this is behind us.
Amazing. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for being here.
Yeah. Take
All
good
right.
care.
All good.
Yeah.